shot, eaten alive, impaled, curb-stomped, dying from a broken heart. Adult cartoons bring their characters some rather grim fates, so today we're ranking adult cartoon deaths gruesome to most gruesome. Today we're focusing on only the most memorable, iconic ways your favorite wacky adult cartoon characters have had their lives ended. Anyway, let's start with the deaths from natural causes. We limited how many of this type of death we'd include, and we decided the least brutal death belongs to a character from one of the least brutal shows, King of the Hill's Cotton Hill. Man, this guy, one of the most memorable characters from King of the Hill, without a doubt.
Of course I am. I killed 50 men.
He hit that perfect balance of complete and utter scumbag, and you know what, at least he's honest about it. That made him entertaining no matter the episode. But as time went on, even this stubborn old man approached the grave, and after roasting his son for having the audacity to say he loves him on his deathbed,
"You need anything, Dad?"
You're still here?
Peggy gives him one of the most satisfying verbal lashings this series ever saw. In a scene that goes way, way harder than it has any right to, she says,
I hope you do go on living forever as the unhappy person you are in the hell you have created here on Earth. I hope you live forever. I really do.
And, of course, Cotton being Cotton, it's the roast of a lifetime from Peggy that makes him decide to just stop living. He literally died on his own terms just to spite Peggy. A perfect end to a petty, hateful man's life. Up next, let's talk about a great activist and a not-so-great mother, Mona Simpson. Homer's biological mother wasn't exactly in the bulk of her son's life, and while that wasn't entirely her fault, being chased down by Mr. Burns for protesting his environmental sins, it doesn't make it any easier for Homie to overlook her absence. Unfortunately, right when Homer was ready to make amends and try to build a real relationship with her, Mona died peacefully in her sleep.
Are you asleep? Asleep with your eyes open? Mom?
Wow, Mona, the man is ready to apologize to you for abandoning him, and you have the audacity to die on his couch? For shame.
After your mother left me, I always planned to dance on her grave. Well, I don't feel much like dancing.
Nah, seriously though, rip. At least she got a chance to try and make amends. Another character from The Simpsons, Bleedin' Gums Murphy, is up next. One of Lisa's role models from the earlier seasons, the two connected while Murphy was in the hospital for unknown reasons, with him dying of, again, unknown causes. Maybe it had something to do with his addiction to Fabergé eggs, or maybe it's karma for the decades-long prank he played on his blind mentor, who can say?
Hey, I've got an older brother that I'll never see. He's a jazz musician or some such. Oh well, bye-bye.
All we know is that Murphy died what seemed to be a relatively painless death, but not before decades of bad decisions that presumably led up to it. Well, if it isn't the consequences of BoJack Horseman's actions, Herb Kazaz. Well, okay, I guess the cancer wasn't BoJack's fault. But then there was the fact that he completely betrayed their friendship, not only staying on the show after Kazaz was fired for being openly gay, but staying out of touch with him for 20 years after the fact. Herb had to live with that betrayal from someone he genuinely cared about, on top of a terminal illness, which adds an extra layer of cruelty. Had BoJack not betrayed him, at least he might have had a friend to walk through his illness with, but yeah, this is not that kind of show. To close out this category, let's talk about The Simpsons' most recent death, Lonely Larry the Barfly. Having a whole episode surrounding the guys at the bar coping with the death of a side character who had literally zero focus throughout the series until that point was an interesting choice to say the least.
Guys, I think Larry's dead.
But one day, that background character at Moe's Tavern finally stopped showing up, and given how he was revealed as a deeply depressed man who was almost exclusively seen at the bar, we can assume he died from a mix of despair and alcohol poisoning. It's a sad way to end a life that seemed relatively empty, but I'm sure he's in a better place where people won't forget his name anymore. We'll miss you, Lonnie.
Take this blender!
But now let's move on to the deaths that seem a little more suspect. These are the instantaneous deaths. Nobody rejects Debbie Grund, and nobody kills her either. That is, except for Debbie Grund. Yeah, remember that storyline where Buck Strickland framed Hank for the death of his mistress to cover his own butt? Despite what pretty much everyone else expected, it actually wasn't Buck at the end of the day, nor was it his wife, Ms. Liz, whose attempt at sleeping with Hank proved that these two really do deserve each other, honestly. Rather, it was actually Debbie herself. She planned on killing Buck and Ms. Liz hiding out in the dumpster of Sugarfoot's to do so, but because Debbie was too impatient to set her rifle, nor her gas station nachos down, she ended up shooting herself as she crawled into her hiding spot.
So, Debbie Grund's killer? was Debbie Grun.
Man, you were so close to dodging the dumb blonde stereotype, Debbie. I bet you didn't see Colonel Stinkmeaner coming this early on the list, did you? Well, he definitely didn't see it. But when Granddad fell victim to what we'll call a demonetization moment, he had to defend his honor by striking this old, bitter man down once and for all. Actually, scratch that. It was just once, not for all. Stinkmeaner is on such a new level of evil that he managed to convince the devil himself to let him out of hell for a chance to exact vengeance on the Freeman family. Add that to his relatively quick death, and you've got a man who got dealt a hilariously light hand considering who he was. Corduroy Jackson is up next. This one's just weird, man. Regular self-pleasure wasn't enough for Corduroy, so he resorted to autoerotic asphyxiation, which, for those of you who weren't taught a new way to risk your life by Netflix show, basically means to strangle yourself during sexual arousal to boost the effect.
Ew, is this your Bible?
No. It's my choking off kit.
You can imagine how this might have gone wrong, I'm sure.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Hey, at least he died in what I only assume it was a pure state of ecstasy, hopefully. Otherwise, this one is just sad. His friends called him Grimy, but he preferred to be addressed more properly as Frank Grimes. In one of the most memorable The Simpsons episodes of all time, Homer came face to face with a more traditional view of the ideal American. Frank Grimes is a man who's hardworking and dedicated to a fault, giving his entire heart and soul to a company that shows him no appreciation.
In the meantime, here's Frank Grimes.
This leads to him being arguably driven insane with jealousy after seeing how much Homer's been blessed despite being, well, Homer.
All right. Woohoo! Yay! Yeah!
And in a fit of rage-induced mocking, he gets himself electrocuted to death. It was probably an instantaneous demise, but it's the fact that Grimes was such a relatively normal dude by Springfieldian standards that makes it harder to swallow. He may have been a stuck-up jerk, but he didn't deserve such a brutal death out of nowhere, nor a lifestyle that kept him from seeing the point of living if he wasn't a big success.
Change the channel, Marge.
That's our Homer!
Oh, I tell you what, next it's time to talk about Buckley. This absolute giblet head had no respect for Lady Propane. He thought dragging a propane tank across the ground was a good idea, or at least not a bad one. This resulted in a serious explosion that caused a lot of trouble for the whole cast, but most tragically it took poor Buckley's life, who hadn't really done anything to warrant it save for mishandling propane.
Buckley and Luann are in there!
Which, if you ask Hank, may well have been enough justification. If there's one death from The Simpsons you remember, it's probably Maude Flanders. She was killed off in the 11th season as a result of her voice actor wanting a pay raise the higher-ups weren't willing to give her. As a result, she was written out via a t-shirt cannon mishap at a ball game, falling to her death as a result.
Oh my lord, she's dead!
You gotta love how the directors would sooner have a character killed off to jumpstart an episode about a man struggling to reconcile his grief and his faith than pay her voice actor more, right? Poor Nettie. Next up is a character who definitely had more justification to fall to his demise than Maude, Mr. Ruckus, the biological father of Uncle Ruckus. No relation. Look, Uncle Ruckus might be a hateful, psychotic, racist psychopath with almost zero redeeming qualities, but his childhood trauma really puts him in a different light.
This ain't no regular baby. It's a white baby. It's the most beautiful white baby in the whole wide world.
With a mother who thought it'd be a good idea to raise her son to think he was white, and a father who took out his daily pain and frustration on his own son through verbal, physical, and emotional abuse, it's hard not to see why Uncle Ruckus turned out to be such a mess. At least he got the last laugh when Mr. fell into his mother's grave, ironically the very person whose death he came to town to celebrate.
I never thought I'd say this, but our family isn't as messed up as I thought.
Loretta Brown is the first Family Guy victim on our list. She died in the same way as the last two, falling to her doom. Only for her, it came with the added shock and humiliation of being caught naked in her bathtub and falling to her death alongside her suds of the day. Man, the fact that Cleveland survived falling from the second story of his house in the bathtub numerous times without even getting injured, but Loretta died instantly is just, it's pure karmic justice.
Loretta.
Well, okay, maybe she didn't deserve that much karma, but still, it was about time she got some comeuppance. Maybe this was just a long overdue dose of catharsis for the audience. From one Seth MacFarlane show to another, closing out this section is Father Donovan. Ironically, I have to point out that Donovan here was not a saint, manipulating his congregation despite not even being a Christian and trying to sleep with the church members' spouses are just a couple of the main reasons we saw with him.
Your husband is home, and he's looking right at us.
I know he's here. I called you over so you could talk to him.
But at least he went out doing a good deed. In Season's beatings, when Stan needs to hunt down the Antichrist, Donovan helps him find the sacred daggers he'll need to finish the job. Sadly, he was crushed to death when the Vatican crumbled around him.
Father Donovan! I can't feel my legs. Are they okay?
But for a guy who's self-admittedly not even a member of the faith he holds over his congregation, that's a pretty honorable way to go. But now it's time to get to the meat and potatoes. These are the brutal deaths. Picking up this section from Solar Opposites is the Wall's savior turned tyrant, Tim. Tim spent the bulk of Season 1 going from zero to hero, leading a revolution against the Duke and his reign of terror. Unfortunately, when he and Cherry discovered a hole to escape from the Wall through, Tim decided to betray his lover so he could keep the Wall under his own control. But despite his carefulness, he was taken out, as all tyrants are, by a lead-painted McDonald's glass.
I never drink out of a Burger King glass.
What? No, I watched you.
I'm sure having a contact lens solution injected into his bloodstream didn't help him either, but hey, you live and learn. In a more metaphorical sense, you could say that Tim's biggest downfall was Tim himself. But Tim was never the worst character by any means. Ethan was one of the most depraved characters in all of Solar Opposites, and that's saying something. Like, it really is saying something. Ethan was a serial killer who fought his urges through the art of rock climbing only to finally lose control and give in to his vices after Hulk saved him from being crushed by a pile of nerds. The stuff this guy did to his victims was horrific, so can I just say that him being covered entirely in magic shell, the chocolate equivalent of concrete, is a complete injustice? Who sees someone murdering people, making pictures out of their entrails, and then rewards them with free chocolate syrup? Screw you, Tim! Nah, but jokes aside, this is basically the equivalent of being frozen and suffocated by quick-drying concrete. It couldn't have been an easy way to go, so that chocolatey taste is just about the only upside here. Not to be confused with his identical cousin, Fit Tony. Let's talk about Fat Tony next. When he was betrayed by Homer, this mob boss proved that he wasn't heartless after all.
How could you, Nicky? I would have given you everything. In the strip club of my heart, you held the key to the champagne room.
Unfortunately, having a heart didn't help him in this scene, because he quite literally died of a broken heart. That's dark by Simpsons standards. This dude was around for decades, and all it took was one heartbreak for him to get taken out for good. From one heart failure to another, next is Simon S. Salty. He was initially thought to be the victim of a 7-way murder plot,
And none of you are leaving until we solve this.
but later it turns out he was just killed by his own poor eating decisions. His self-professed final burger was what brought about a sudden heart attack that killed the fast food tycoon. It's a shame considering that he was just about to start eating healthy.
Hello, I'm rolling out some new and improved menu item. Come on, I'm Italian.
And again, he did chain up one of his less popular mascots in the basement for not selling well, so maybe he kinda deserved this? Before there was Angela, Peter had a different boss, Mr. Weed, owner of the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory. Weed was actually a pretty nice dude. He genuinely cared about his employees and even made time to hang out with them outside of work. This is exemplified when he goes to the Griffin's home for dinner one fateful evening, which would unfortunately result in him choking to death. If that weren't a shocking and painful enough demise,
he's dead.
The episode didn't even focus on him. It just shifted over to Peter entering a Renaissance Fair jousting tournament. If there's one Family Guy character who deserved better, it's Meg. But if there's another, it's this guy.
I will tell you, it's just a couple of eggs with the peppers left over from last night. Yes. Okay, now playtime is over. Turn it off, monkey, okay?
I'm a Mr. Weed stan till the day I die. Next, it's time to talk about everyone's favorite bit character from Family Guy, Doug. Remember Doug? No? Well, that's a burden I'll bear for you, I guess. All you needed to know is that Doug, like Johnny and Vern, was a bit character who wasn't popular with audiences.
Well, I tried to get a...
Hey, I don't want to be too tired to drive home. Does this story have an ending?
He didn't even get a goofy cutaway or anything because Stewie just said point blank that Doug died in a commuter plane crash.
Whatever. Oh, and Doug died in a commuter plane crash this morning.
While he's not a character we're missing dearly, this is still the tragedy of a young child dying in a plane crash. That's brutal on its own, but considering we obviously don't see it, we have no clue whether Doug died in the explosion instantaneously, whether he bled out, or whether he ended up going through some other form of death. The uncertainty of this one makes it even more unsettling, so we had to place him pretty high up, even if nobody really cares about the guy. Secretariat is up next. Young Bojack didn't have any good role models at home, so he settled for Secretariat. Elliott, a celebrity hero of his known for being a great runner. Unfortunately, he made one bad decision that ruined everything, illegally betting on his own races. When he was found out, he got banned for life from racing, a punishment so severe that his response was to take his own life by jumping off a ridge into the ocean. If his post-mortem poem is anything to go off of, he had second thoughts during the fall, which only makes his death even harder to swallow. Diane Simmons is next, and being one of Family Guy's few true villains, it's fitting that she had one of the most dramatic deaths.
Tom has dared me to do the news top list. I've got the goods, but have I got the guts? Find out at 11.
In And Then There Were Fewer, she killed several people and framed Tom Tucker for it with the intention of usurping him as the only news anchor on Quahog Channel 5 News. And she would have gotten away with it too, if it hadn't been for one meddling infant.
If anybody's gonna take that down, it's gonna be me.
Side note, how the heck did nobody notice an infant harboring a high-end sniper rifle? Another question, what hurts more than one bullet? A ton of bullets, I'd reckon. Enter Vern and Johnny. In the earlier seasons of the show, they would occasionally come up with some fast-paced commentary and catchy piano riffs, which we found endearing.
Watch me leap through this big hoop. Vamp! Vamp!
Unfortunately for them, a lot of people apparently didn't, so in one episode Stewie straight up broke the fourth wall by murdering these two and promising they wouldn't show up again. If that's not wild enough, they actually did show up again, although they ended up on different sides of the afterlife. We believed in you, Johnny! From one bullet victim, or I guess a pair of them, to another, next is Jack Smith. This guy was a thief to the end, always looking to outdo his greatest heists with even greater ones. Somehow, after all the heists he'd pulled off over the years, the Metropolitan Museum of Sports Memorabilia ended up being his Achilles heel, and he ended up not only failing the heist, but getting gunned down by the police. What makes us place him so low in this section is the fact that he was so haunted by his failure that when Roger summoned him via a seance, he decided to possess Steve's body so he could finish the job. Even beyond the grave, this dude's an absolute scoundrel. Sista Sisto is next, a victim of the classic crushing, a good old-fashioned mainstay of animated deaths, but in this case, a pretty underwhelming one.
Sisto is dead. She was a false prophet, preying on us because we believed in something greater.
Sisto might have been the most utterly evil character in the Wall subplot, and maybe even the entire show. That, let me reiterate, is really saying something. And for the crimes of branding an infant child, leading a cult for the purpose of fear-mongering, torturing her followers at random, and jumping to murder anytime she's questioned.
Make sure you get the other side after this one's flogged out.
What? Nobody flogs the front! That's just cruel!
She's met with an instantaneous stomp from Jesse. I guess being crushed by the person whose image she used to manipulate everyone is kind of poetic. Actually, you know what? I kind of convinced myself. 7 out of 10 villain death would watch die again. Now, let's talk about Sarah Lynn. Given all the horror stories of how Hollywood child stars are treated that have been coming out in recent years, her story hits even harder now than ever before. With an abusive stepfather and a more overtly abusive mother, she didn't have good role models in her life, so she had to settle for her TV dad, Bojack. Unfortunately, though, Bojack is also abusive in his own ways. In Sarah Lynn's final hours, he broke an 8-month sober streak just so he could feel better by getting drugged up with her.
Oh my god, that mirror is talking to us.
You can't stop us! Us from the future!
We're making amends, assholes!
No!
This resulted in her overdosing at the planetarium she'd been wanting to go to as Bojack neglected her emotional needs all night.
Sarah Lynn?
And in Bojack waiting 17 minutes before calling the ambulance. Maybe it wasn't the most physically painful death, and she at least seemed peaceful to a certain degree, but that doesn't change the fact that one adult Sarah Lynn genuinely thought she could count on completely failed her here. If hell is forever, whether you like it or not, then Adam has got some unpleasant times to be looking forward to. At least, probably. If Pentius got into heaven, it's just as likely Adam got into hell, but I digress. All we know for sure is that he took a serious beating from Lucifer that nearly ended him, only leaving him alive long enough for Nifty to shank him multiple times and laugh maniacally at the joy of the golden bloodshed.
Whoa! Hey, you got something sticking out of your thing there.
Someone really needs to keep an eye on her. Francis Griffin was a man who spent the majority of his life crushing others' spirits in the name of being a holy man. Now, if you asked me if he deserved a little crushing in return, I'd certainly say yes, but even for such a mean guy, this is a bit much.
Take off that stupid costume! You look like a damn fool.
Dad, you won't say that when you see my grand unicycle finale.
Peter's misguided attempt to act as entertainment for Meg's birthday party leads to the lovable clown accidentally crushing Francis. Turns out riding a unicycle downstairs isn't a great idea. But hey, it could be worse, Francis. At least you didn't die with a unicycle stuck up your ass. Now let's move on to the heavier hitters of the day. These are the seriously gruesome deaths, from bloody visuals to disturbing implications to something that doesn't even fall into either of those categories. First up, we have the legendary martial artist bounty hunter Bushido Brown. This guy was one of the best recurring characters in the Boondocks, before his untimely death during an attempt to protect the Freeman home from Stinkmeaner's old gang, the Hateocracy. In all honesty, the guy put up a really impressive and well-animated fight against them, and only died when he was lured in to get a killing blow on the leader, only to fall victim to the deadly flying guillotine. Oh, like the old saying goes, you never bring karate to a guillotine fight. Neglected IPs beware. Next is the CEO. Much like Rex, this guy was a smug douche who just didn't know when to quit. If most people came across a guy like James in real life, they'd turn heel pretty quickly, but calling this CEO a fat, ugly nerd was a death sentence. Or at least it would have been, if not for Trogler being so obedient to his master's command to not shoot indoors. As a result, the CEO was stabbed directly in the skull, which almost immediately killed him, but left him alive just long enough to enjoy some blood-battered chicken nuggets in his final moments.
I'm all alone. What do I do now?
I'm sick of being alone too.
It's a double-edged sword, really. On one hand, the CEO had to endure the pain of a knife in his skull for several minutes. On the other, he got one last chicken nugget. Who's that up next? Why, it's Smormu, the fifth smiling friend. Yes, the one who was tragically taken from us just as soon as we got him. If his obituary is anything to go off of, it looks like he was strangled to death. Honestly, with the amount of things people casually do in smiling friends with no legal consequences, the suspect could be basically anyone at this point. I'm not pointing fingers, but Charlie did look pretty pissed off when he showed up. Nah, I'm kidding. Charlie would never kill Smormu. Right, Charlie? Right, Charlie? Next is one of many deaths brought about by a departed voice actor. Mayor Adam West was technically killed by natural causes as far as we know, since the only reason he was written out of the show was because Adam West passed away. As much as I like Wild West, Adam West was irreplaceable, so it's only right to retire the character alongside his departed actor.
Come on, Mittens. Come on, Paul. What a ridiculous name for a cat. Paul, that's a person's name.
The only reason we're mentioning him regardless is the fact that Adam West is the most ridiculous character in the show.
Don't look, don't look. I spilled something.
And say it with me, guys, that's saying something. From shooting a random fisherman out of nowhere to impress his date to straight up brutalizing the Noid, this dude was always up to something crazy when he showed up.
Hey, baby. Want some Adam West pics?
I think it's safe to say whatever or whoever killed West had to have some level of insanity to it.
God, you blew it up! You really did it! Damn you all to hell!
Brian, look out! Yeah, you all knew this one was coming. Brian might not have stayed dead, but in one of the most infamous episodes in the entire series, he was hit by a car while preparing to play street hockey with Stewie.
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Griffin, but Brian's injuries are just too severe for us to save him.
Now, this did appear to be pretty brutal, with Brian being battered just enough to not kill him immediately, but we have to mention the fact that he was revived, literally 2 episodes later. And that's not to mention that, with as wacky as Family Guy can get with its physical violence, Brian has suffered plenty of injuries that were way more visibly painful than this one. Remember that time he got straight gored by a whole gorilla exhibit at the zoo just because they didn't like his book? From one revived victim to another, next up is the Duke. Despite being the original villain of the Wall subplot, Ringo here turned out to have way more of a conscience than most of the others. During his time in the yard with Cherry, the Duke started to develop a softer side and began caring for her like a daughter, willing to risk his neck for her and expressing some regret about who he was in the Wall. Tragically, in order to ensure that Cherry and Paisley can escape from Jeff the Possum, the Duke makes the ultimate sacrifice by blowing the monster up from the inside. The only reason he's not any higher up is the fact that in season 5,
I'm alive.
He ends up revived by the Make Alive Ray when Terry uses it to restore the yard to its former glory. He has no idea who he was, but this changes everything about his fate. After developing a conscience and performing a good deed before his death, the Duke had a second chance to be a better person. That's about as merciful a fate as a mass murderer could hope for, right? Next we have Rex's death, which honestly, he was practically asking for it. Rex is, or was rather, the type of guy whose ego blinded him to pretty much everything else, like the fact that his former star, Mr. Frog, was an absolute unhinged psychopath. I don't know what part of Rex's brain thought that both interrupting Mr. Frog and insulting him during a vulnerable moment was a good idea, but by getting instantaneously eaten alive, I think he got the message that it wasn't. From one smiling friend's death to another, let's talk about Mip. This guy was so close to getting away with his crimes. I mean, think about it. His whole goal was to manipulate somebody into delivering a package to the princess that turned out to be a bomb, so his hands would be clean. Ideally, killing his stalking victim and his henchmen in the process.
Please be very careful with this creation.
Had he not gotten between Charlie and Pym by accident, he would have probably walked away scot-free. The guy was genuinely a next-level villain, so in hindsight, being impaled on multiple swords and bleeding out as he commissioned Pym to take on his final quest was the least he deserved. Then there was whatever that ending was. Seriously, that genuinely took me off guard. If you don't have tissues on you, you'd better grab some. Let's talk about Seymour, Fry's dog from Futurama. Fry had been mistaken about a lot of things, but few so blatantly as thinking his old dog forgot about him. In fact, when he ended up frozen for 1,000 years, Seymour waited for him outside of the restaurant day after day, enduring harsh weather and emotional devastation in the process. Sure, Fry's old boss took care of him as much as he could, but that doesn't change that Seymour either thought Fry had abandoned him, or he died desperately waiting for him to prove that he didn't. Either way, this is easily one of the most emotionally devastating deaths on our list. But this is about gruesomeness, my friends, and for our final category, we've only saved the genuinely disturbing demises. We here at Wicked Binge do not condone blackface, so as far as we're concerned, the forest demon got what was coming to him. The nerve of this guy to come to a party in blackface with such paper-thin excuses as, "This is my natural color and I am literally a forest demon."
Whoa, is that blackface, dude?
I think speak for the law itself when I say that this guy being curb-stomped, torn apart limb by limb, and eaten alive, then eaten dead, was completely justified, and the only reasonable series of responses to have in such a situation. Oh yeah, I think he was also gonna kill everyone. More minor issue, but it's still worth mentioning. Talk about rude. There's nothing that hits quite like a good revenge story, except maybe the guy getting revenge. Rick Prime is the manifestation of everything awful about Rick as a person. After confusing refusal to accept a stranger's offer of interdimensional travel with death-warranting insult, he decided the only logical response was to send Rick the interdimensional equivalent of a pipe bomb to kill his family, going even further after the fact to kill his own wife in every dimension. But in this scene, Rick C-137 finally gets to come face to face with the guy who's been causing all his problems, who looks weirdly familiar actually, and beat the life out of him as he insulted him, giving him a world of pain and none of the smug satisfaction he'd hoped for. Landing just outside of the gruesome podium is New Brian, who easily has the most shocking death in Family Guy history. He only appeared in the episode The Man with Two Brians, but he sure made an impact.
New Brian. Hey, gang, whose leg do you have to hump to get a hug around here?
Throughout the episode, despite Brian's suspicions that Peter was planning to replace him with the new guy, it turned out that New Brian was genuinely really nice and that Peter and the gang genuinely enjoyed his company.
Hey, New Brian. Oh, you have a guitar. Yep. In fact, I wrote a new song today.
But in a plot twist that shocked everyone, it turned out that New Brian wanted to die so much that he decided to end himself by hacking himself into multiple pieces and throwing himself into a garbage bag. The guy hated himself so much that he defied the laws of nature itself just to end it all. Needless to say, the Griffins were shocked.
Oh my god!
It's okay, Peter.
Yay! Oh my god, oh my god!
Especially Stewie, who was not involved in any way with this tragic circumstance. If there's any show that rivals Family Guy in having the most brutal yet inconsequential deaths out there, it's Rick and Morty. Mr. Goldenfield, Wasp Universe, is one of the most absolutely disturbing moments in a series that's known for having some of the most bloody and gruesome stuff you'll see in a cartoon.
Oh god! Kill me! Please kill me!
It's one thing to have a show with vicious sci-fi violence all throughout, but when you throw in a family of humanoid wasps eating a humanoid caterpillar piece by piece as he screams in agony begging to be killed, man, I don't know how to describe that. Oh, but it gets worse. See, Grub Denfield here actually gives birth while he's being eaten, begging his babies to run away, only for them to be eaten in his sight by Wasp Morty. Physically, this is probably the most painful and brutal death on the list, so why isn't it at the top? Well, at least he only died once, right? The silver medal of brutality goes to Dr. Ray Petit, Stan's CIA-appointed therapist. He's basically the Kenny of American Dad, because whenever he shows up, you can bet he's gonna die in some over-the-top way, whether it's being shrunken down into a model version of Langley Falls and being eaten by ants, getting his guts squeezed out like a Go-Gurt tube by a mall escalator, or even death by leaf blower. Petite always suffers some kind of hideous demise and comes back like it's nothing.
They don't call me the Shrink Ray because my name is Ray and I'm a shrink.
Like, seriously, he's concerningly casual about how often he dies, to the point where even his coworkers are aware that he sometimes can't come to work on account of being dead that particular day. But, well, we've name dropped him already. If we're gonna talk about characters who've died countless times throughout their series, how could we leave Kenny McCormick out of the discussion? The difference between Kenny and Ray Petit is... Oh wait, actually there are a lot of differences. Unlike Dr. Petit, Kenny is both a child and one of the main supporting characters of his show. Their only similarity is the running gag revolving around them dying in most of their appearances, and while for Kenny this mostly stopped after the first 5 seasons, it still remains worth mentioning that he died a lot more than Ray Petit. On top of having more deaths, Kenny has deaths brutal enough for us to have a whole 30-minute video ranking them. I don't know how long this video is going to be once the editing is done, but I just want you to soak up the fact that Kenny's deaths are so frequent and so brutal that discussion of all of them would take longer than all the others on this list combined. And that's not even counting the time Cartman ate all the skin off his KFC, which was truly a fate even worse than death. Kenny, you've easily earned our gold medal of brutality for the day. Just please be careful putting it on.